Today we are going to study about one more structure which you see in the oral cavity, so that is soft palate. So before we talk about the soft palate, let me describe what is palate. So this you have already studied in the embryology class. So now when we saw the oral cavity and then the nasal cavity, so this is the external nose, anterior nares, then below that upper lip, lower lip, the region of chin, then here this is the neck, anterior median plane of the neck. So here you saw the roof of the oral cavity, at the same time the floor of the nasal cavity. So the floor for the nasal cavity, roof for the oral cavity was formed by the palate. This palate, if you just observe, anterior 2/3 of this palate was formed by the hard palate and posterior 1/3 was formed by the soft palate. A soft fibromusculoglandular structure which is hanging down like a curtain. So from the posterior free margin of the hard palate. So this was called as soft palate. So this is hard palate, this is soft palate. Hard palate forms the floor of the nasal cavity. Palate forms the floor of the nasal cavity. At the same time, it also forms the roof for the oral cavity. Now this is mandible. So this is the teeth of the lower jaw. So and mandible gives attachment to tongue. And tongue at the posterior end, it gets attached to the epiglottis. Now this is epiglottis. So now here again the same diagram what we had written in the sagittal section. So this is the anterior sloping portion of the nasal cavity, middle horizontal portion, and now this is the posterior sloping portion of the roof of the nasal cavity, so which is formed by the sphenoid bone, and sphenoid bone gives attachment to the pharyngeal raphe. So this is the wall of the pharynx. So what you are seeing, so this is the wall of the pharynx. So now, so this is the palate. Anterior 2/3 is formed by the hard palate, posterior 1/3 is formed by the soft palate. So which forms the floor for the nasal cavity, roof for the oral cavity. Now once we have defined, so what is palate, what are the two parts of the palate, now let us discuss a little about the hard palate. So this is a bony partition what you are seeing. So bony component of the palate, so which is forming it, which is seen in its anterior 2/3. So here itself, so within the hard palate, anterior 2/3 of the hard palate itself is formed by the palatine process of the maxilla, and posterior 1/3 is formed by the horizontal process of the palatine bone. So that is the formation of hard palate. The superior surface of this palate will be covered because it is coming in relation with the nasal cavity. It will be covered by the epithelium of the nasal cavity. So that is nothing but your ciliated columnar epithelium, pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. So and then if you come to the floor, so that is here the floor of the nasal cavity. So because it is forming the floor of the nasal cavity, ciliated columnar epithelium will become the lining epithelium of the superior surface of the palate. Now when you come to the inferior surface of the palate, this surface which is coming in contact with the oral cavity. So I can call this as oral surface and this is the nasal surface. So nasal surface, nasal epithelium, so that is ciliated columnar epithelium. Oral surface is oral epithelium, so that is epithelium of the oral cavity. So that is nothing but here stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium. So here it is stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium. Here it is ciliated columnar epithelium. So superior surface, inferior surface. So this can be called as nasal surface. This can be called as oral surface of the palate. Now, so when you look at the soft palate, I said this is a fibromusculoglandular organ which is hanging like a curtain from the posterior free margin of the hard palate. So you can see here this soft palate has got two surfaces in its hanging position. Okay, so when it is in relaxed position, you can see there are two surfaces. So this is the one which is coming in contact with the oral cavity. I can call this as oral surface, or this is otherwise called as the anterior surface. So now this one is called as the posterior surface which is coming in contact with the nasal cavity, or otherwise called as nasal surface. Then it has got an upper border and it has got a lower border. You can see the lower border is free and it is hanging. So the upper border is attached to the posterior free margin of the hard palate. So this is the upper border or superior border which is attached to the posterior free margin of the hard palate, and inferior border it is free, or inferior end is free. It hangs like a curtain here. So now this is the anterior surface, this is the posterior surface. So this is when the soft palate is in the relaxed position. If the soft palate contracts, If the soft palate contracts, then what happens? See, this is in the relaxed position. When it contracts, it will be like this. So when it contracts, it will be like this, covering the gap between the oropharynx and the nasopharynx. So in that position, your superior border will become the anterior border, inferior end will become the posterior border. So superior border, inferior border will become anterior border and posterior border. Now anterior surface or oral surface will become the inferior surface. So here this was the superior surface, so or the nasal surface. So here nasal surface will become the superior surface. So anterior surface will become inferior surface. This superior surface will become posterior surface will become superior surface. So that's how. So usually we talk about the soft palate, so in the relaxed position, so with the upper border, lower border, and then the anterior surface and then the posterior surface. So this is anterior surface, posterior surface, superior border, and then inferior border. Now, so once we have seen the location of the hard palate as well as the soft palate and how this hard palate is formed by two important bones, so maxilla as well as the horizontal plate of the palatine bone. So once we have seen the upper border, lower border, and then the two surfaces, interior and posterior surfaces of the soft palate, now let us see what are the other important structure which you see in relation with this soft palate. See, from the undersurface of the soft palate towards the lateral border of the tongue at the junction of anterior 2/3 and posterior 1/3, you get a fold of mucous membrane. This is called as palatoglossal fold. At the same time, there is one more fold arising from the same undersurface of the soft palate and it goes to the wall of the pharynx. So this fold will be called as palatopharyngeal fold. Palatopharyngeal fold. Here, this is called as palatoglossal fold. So there are two folds of mucous membrane which are running from the undersurface of the soft palate. So palatoglossal fold and then the palatopharyngeal fold. Palatoglossal fold comes to the glossus, that is to the tongue at the lateral border at the junction of anterior 2/3 and posterior 1/3, and palatopharyngeal goes to the lateral wall of the pharynx. Palatopharyngeal fold goes to the lateral wall of the pharynx. Palatoglossal fold, it carries the muscle of the same name, palatoglossus, and similarly palatopharyngeal fold carries the muscle of the same name, palatopharyngeus muscle. At the same time, so from the nasopharynx, so you could see the nasopharynx, the tubal opening, and the tubal opening had got an elevation along its upper and then the posterior margin. This was called tubal elevation. And from this tube, we could see there were two folds of mucous membrane. One was coming to the superior surface of the soft palate, the other one was going towards the wall of the pharynx. So the one which was going to the superior surface of the soft palate was called salpingo-palatine fold, and the one which was going towards the wall of the pharynx was called as salpingo-pharyngeal fold. So salpingo-palatine fold, salpingo-pharyngeal fold. The salpingo-palatine fold carries one of the muscles of the soft palate, that is levator veli palatii. Salpingopharyngeus fold carries salpingopharyngeus muscle. So this is one of the longitudinal muscles of pharynx. So these are the attachments to the soft palate. So from above it is receiving salpingo-palatine fold, from below it is giving two folds by itself, so that is palatoglossal and palatopharyngeal fold. So now this is regarding the gross features of the soft palate. Now coming to the contents which are present within this soft palate. What exactly is there within the soft palate? So when we defined, I said this is a fibro-musculo-glandular organ, I said. So what is fibrous component? So the fibrous component is nothing but one of the flattened tendons of muscles of the soft palate. So flattened tendons of muscles of the soft palate. So that is muscle is called tensor veli palatii, and the tendon of this gets converted to form a sheet that is called palatine aponeurosis. Palatine aponeurosis. Next comes the muscles of the soft palate. So the muscles of the soft palate can be studied under 5 headings. So all these are paired muscles. So tensor veli palatii muscle, levator veli palatii muscle, palatoglossus muscle, palatopharyngeus muscle, and then musculus uvulae. So these are 5 pairs of muscles what you see in relation with the soft palate. Tensor veli palatii, levator veli palatii, palatoglossus, palatopharyngeus and musculus uvulae. Now coming to the glands. So the glands of the soft palate are called minor salivary glands because they throw their secretions directly into the oral cavity. So these are minor salivary glands. These are otherwise called as palatine glands. These are otherwise called as palatine glands because they throw their secretion directly into the oral cavity. So that's why these are otherwise called as minor salivary glands. These glands, they get their innervation from pterygopalatine ganglion. Pterygopalatine ganglion, and they throw their secretion directly into the oral cavity. So which maintains the lubrication of the oral cavity as such, and then it also maintains the lubrication of the soft palate itself. So this is about the gross features of soft palate. Now let us discuss about the muscles of the soft palate in the next session.